Hi, I'm Nick Rains from Leica Camera Australia. Leica recently released a couple of lenses for the SL range. That's the Summicron 35 and the Summicron 50mm lenses. And you may ask, why do we need two lenses of the same focal length when we have two lenses already, 35 and 50mm? These are an APO design, these are a non-APO design. So what does that mean and how different are those lenses? Apochromatic simply means that these lenses are built to a higher standard than a normal lens, with the goal of focusing every single wavelength of light at exactly the same point on the sensor. Okay? Normally, red, blue, and green light don't focus at the same point, and getting them to focus as close as possible is quite difficult, and it requires aspherical elements, it requires different glass compositions, it requires very clever lens design and innovation, and basically it makes a lens that fits that designation into something quite special. And these are special lenses. I don't propose to use these as some sort of benchmark because they are edge case. They are almost as good as it's possible to make. And if you check out MTF charts for these lenses, you'll see that they are basically flatlined across all four of the lines per millimeter ratings. If you don't know what that means, it's definitely worth looking it up because these are really quite special. My benchmark lens is going to be my zoom lens for the SL. This is the Vario Elmarit 24-90. This is a lens I've used for many, many years. It's phenomenal. It's as sharp as I could possibly want for my work, and it's just done me great service over the years. So this is going to be my real point of comparison, a realistic point of comparison for the new lenses. I've also thrown into the mix, just for interest really, the APO-Summicron 50mm M lens, which within the M range is one of the finest lenses ever made too, and of course it is an apochromatic design. If you were to actually have one of these lenses in your hands, you might notice something quite surprising. These lenses are remarkably light. There's nothing plasticky about them. It's a metal barrel and they feel beautiful. But when you compare them to the APO-Summicron lenses, these are quite solid. These are 750 grams. These are only 370 thereabouts. And the difference is very marked. And on the SL2 and SL2S, they balance beautifully. But again, there's no sense of them being any sort of inferior quality because of the way. They're just lighter versions. It's really quite surprising. Something that is often raised as a question, and that's where are these lenses made? The APO-Summicrons are made in Germany. It says so on the lens barrel. The Summicron 35 and 50mm are made in Portugal. It also says so on the lens barrel. What does that mean? Absolutely nothing. They are made by Leica at a Leica factory with Leica employees, Leica equipment, and nothing more than that. It's a Leica factory, so they are made by Leica. The Portugal bit, the Germany bit is just, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a legal definition because you have to say where something is made. And but it means nothing in terms of quality. People have this idea that only the Leica lenses made in Germany are genuine Leica lenses. Well, that's simply not the case. It's made at the factory in Porto by Leica. Therefore, it is a Leica lens with all that that means. Oh, in case you're wondering why I've got the white gloves on this time, it's because these two lenses are straight out of the box, brand new, and I don't want to get any paw prints on them because they have to go back to be sold in the stores. Anyway, let's look at some pictures. Nothing too exotic, I'm afraid, just for my front garden, but I'm hoping that you can see the differences that I'll be pointing out, and the differences are clear, but you may be very surprised just how good these lenses are in comparison to two of the finest lenses ever made. Okay, what are we looking at here? Well, this is just my front garden, or part of it. If I just zoom out, you'll see it's just the view from my front door, in fact. And it makes a good test subject because it's relatively flat and it's got lots of really fine organic detail in it, which is quite hard for digital sensors to record. Let me just zoom in on these two pictures, and you can see in the metadata at the top of each panel which lens is which. So on the left, we have the new Summicron-SL 50mm aspheric, and on the right we have the Vario Elmarit SL 2.8 to 4, 24-90, and it's at f3.6, which is wide open at, well, it says here 48mm. It's about as close as I could get it on the scale on the lens. And I'm thinking that you won't see any difference between these two. Certainly any subtleties might be masked by the video rendering, which I can only apologize for. I'm not unable to record this in 4K, unfortunately. So the 1080 is what is the best we can do with the equipment we have available. And I can just about see on the left-hand side, this coil of wire here making up the chicken sculpture's eye is ever so slightly better rendered on the new lens. So given that this lens has been my workhorse for many, many years, and given that I've had some fantastic results out of it, this is a very, very good result indeed for the Summicron. And bear in mind, it's almost 2 stops faster at that point. So it is f2 on the left and f3.6 on the right. In terms of edge sharpness, let me just lock them together, and I'm just going to come down to, this one didn't move. Anyway, not to worry, there we go. The zoom lens, ooh, crikey, that's really hard to tell. The zoom lens is slightly sharper, but again, there's a bit of depth of field going on here as well. 3.6 versus 2, could be either of those, but I've got to look really closely. So it's remarkable that a zoom lens can be this good, and also it's remarkable that the Summicrons can be this good, considering how good the zoom lens already is, if that makes sense. So very happy with that. It looks really nice. Anything that meets my benchmark of lenses, which is the 24-90, is more than good enough for me. It's, it is really superb. All right, now then, let's try something a bit tougher. I'm going to swap the right-hand image for the APO-Summicron. Oops, I'll do that. I want that one on the left, and on the right-hand side, we want the APO-Summicron. Okay, so now we've got both of those. We've got Summicron-SL f2, APO-Summicron-SL f2. And I'm going to zoom in on the chicken sculpture again. And this time, I am hoping that you will see a very, very fine detail benefit on the right-hand side, which is the APO-Summicron. This is exactly what you'd expect to see. Broadly speaking, very similar contrast, almost identical color. They were taken at exactly the same time. The one on the left looks a tiny bit warmer to me, just a smidgen in the leaves, but nothing much to worry about. But again, the curl of wire in the chicken sculpture's eye, to me on the right, looks that little bit better defined. Interestingly enough, if I just add 20 or 30 sharpening to the left-hand image, it then becomes quite difficult to tell them apart. Now, but these are both on default sharpening. I don't go to 0 sharpening because everything needs sharpening. I just go on default because that seems to be a reasonable comparison point. If we look in the corners, we should see, if I can just lock these together, there we go, lock them together. If we go into the corner, we should see, again, the same difference. And in fact, that's pretty good. I was expecting, yes, the right-hand image has definitely got a little more acutance to it. The flowers are that little bit better defined, but you've got to look closely, and it's that micro detail, which is exactly where you'd expect an apochromatic design to shine greatly, and it does here. So you are getting what you pay for with the Apo lenses for sure. Just going up into these flowers right in the middle of the area, just unlock that so we can match the two things. Now here, I'm finding it very difficult to tell them apart. It could be a little focusing difference, because very hard to focus at f2 on exactly the same thing. But to me, the fact that I've got to look closely here is impressive. This is the middle of the frame, obviously. If I come down to this glass sculpture here, I think now, yeah, the right-hand image has got a bit more contrast to it. But you see, we're looking at images on a retina screen at 100% here. That's what I'm looking at. And really, if you're looking that closely, it's astonishing how close these images are in quality. And in fact, that's possibly the takeaway here. It's not how different these lenses are in price or weight or anything. It's how similar they are. The Summicron lens is a lot closer to the APO-Summicron than I was expecting, which is an incredible thing if you think about it. In terms of bokeh, there's a very interesting conclusion here. And I'm going to swap the left image for this image of the flower. Come out to full screen. I'm going to swap the right-hand image for this image of the flower. And that should give me the two lenses. APO-Summicron on the left this time, and Summicron on the right. Now, one thing that you should be able to see, and this is, I'm hoping it shows up, is that I think that the bokeh is a little smoother on the Summicron, not the APO-Summicron. If you look closely at the flower, and it's just got to load, give it a second, I think you'll notice that the flower is definitely sharper. So this is close focusing we're talking about here. It's just going to take a second to load. Okay, so it's loaded, and just comparing the two, it's hard to tell them apart again. I'm just going to flick images just to make sure, because I'm just noticing here that the focusing is slightly different on this leaf to this one, so I must have the focus a millimeter or two different. Let me just change it to another shot. That is, oh no, hang on. I want that one, and I want that one. There we go. There it goes. Yes, there's definitely an increase in sharpness in the right-hand image. Nothing wrong with the left-hand image, but the right-hand one definitely has a higher sharpness level in the flower right in the middle, right in here. But what's really interesting is if I move across to one of these out-of-focus leaves, the background, it's really hard to see, and I might even be imagining it, but I think the left-hand one is slightly smoother than the right-hand one. Very, very difficult to tell, but it's so similar. Little bit smoother in here, tiny bit, but it's so similar as to be almost indistinguishable. Maybe I'm imagining it, but if it's that close and I've got to look that closely, then to all intents and purposes they're the same. So the lovely bokeh fall off of your classic Summicron lenses is absolutely maintained in these new lenses, no question about it. Yeah, it's a little bit better on the left in this area here. This is just a tiny bit more scattery, but again, super minimal difference. But if I had to call it, I would call it for the Summicron and not the APO-Summicron. The other thing about these lenses, which I really enjoy, and again, this is my personal opinion, is the feel of the focus. They feel light when you pick them up, but not light plasticky, because they are metal. They're not plasticky, they're just light. They feel beautifully made. But if you operate the focusing mechanism, I personally prefer the weight of this focusing ring to the weight of the APO-Summicrons. This, to me, whilst it's perfectly smooth and there's no variability in torque, there's no slop in it at all, as you'd expect, to me, that's a little stiffer than I prefer. Some people like the stiffness, some people don't. Personally, I want it to be very responsive with a feather touch, and with this lens in manual focus on the SL2 and SL2S, you really feel very connected to that focus point. When you look through the viewfinder and you're just doing the smallest movements, that the focus moves exactly as you expect it to, and you don't get that overshooting effect sometimes. Now, they're not mechanical. They are electronic focusing, just like the APO lenses. So they're not like an M lens, which is fully mechanical. So they are electronic, but somehow that has been smoothed out. And it could very well be that the elements being lighter, the lenses are lighter, of course, has something to do with that. But that was my impression. You'll also find that the autofocus is a little snappier than with the APO lenses. The mechanisms in here are heavier than in here, and that's why the lens is heavier. And it seems to be that little bit more responsive. It's a little bit hard to measure, but that's my impression. Particularly with the tracking. It seems to track beautifully with the eye tracking. So for video, these make an excellent choice. I think the takeaway here is that these are astonishingly good for where they sit in the Leica range. They're never going to be as good as an apochromatic lens, but then they're already as good as pretty much any other lens in the M range, and they're certainly as good as my benchmark Vario Elmerit 24-90. So given that I've been happy with this lens for many years, I'm more than happy with these. And in some respects, they're possibly my preference. Anyway, go into a store, have a look and see what you think. I think you'll be very interested in the results if you shoot a few frames. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I'll talk to you again in the next video.